If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Jennifer Dohr. Jennifer is a writer, award-winning educator, and the founder of Authentic Voice. She guides people to help themselves on the page and in their life by picking up a pen and writing the worst junk in all the world. Through workshops, retreats, and private sessions, Jennifer teaches her simple but not easy process of assessing the subconscious to anyone ready to acknowledge and integrate their whole self. A newfound colleague, Jennifer, what an absolute pleasure it is to welcome you to the show, and thank you for being this week's guest expert.
Oh my goodness, Susan, it is such a pleasure to be here. And I'm so glad that we got connected just the other week, in fact.
Yes, and we've got several people in common. We were just talking before about the fact that one of the podcasts that we did, I think several months ago, was with Leslie Berliant, who talked about your deep voice, and you're going to talk about your authentic voice. I think there'll be a link to that podcast as well to have people, listen to both of them. So talking about authentic voice, I know you love sharing that. So let's first understand what exactly you mean by the authentic voice.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that. And there's certainly a connection to Leslie Berliant's concept of the deep voice. For me, the authentic voice is acknowledging and integrating the fullness of our lived experiences, the moments and memories, the experiences, doubts, people, places. And what we want to do is integrate them first on the page and then in our lives. And that's the best way we can live from what I call our whole self.
Something that you say here in the introduction is writing the worst junk in all the world. I love that, by the way, because sometimes when you look at what you've written, you're like, this is ridiculous. This is awful.
Yes.
How do you relate that then to the authentic voice?
Absolutely. So this phrase came up in 27 years as a high school English teacher. I would often be asking my students to write something about their own lives. And they would say, well, I haven't lived long enough and I'm only 18 and I don't have anything to say. And they would sort of write what they thought that they should say. And so one time I grabbed a piece of paper and a pen and I told one of my students to just head off to another room and go write the worst junk in all the world. And it was incredible what was able to come forth from her. And so that since then has become my moniker. What happens when we go to write, and I think we're all good writers, we've all grown up writing and using the written word, but what happens is that internal critic comes in and, oh my goodness, this isn't right and this is terrible and this will never be published. What we need to be willing to do is to write what needs to be written, write where we are, and understand that there really is no right. The subconscious is going to allow us to reveal the deep stories, the experiences where our healthy authenticity resides. The key is to get out of our own way and let that happen.
And I love that you say that because I know personally that that's been a challenge to write authentically rather than write what you think people want to know, which I think was the excellent example that you gave with these high school kids. Because you're right, that's exactly what they say. Is like, I haven't lived long enough to write anything worthwhile.
Right. And then, of course, we become adults and we're really not far from that 18-year-old self. Of course, we've lived longer and have more experiences to process and integrate, but those fears are still there. And what happens when we aren't willing to write the worst junk in all the world, whether that's a manuscript or a brainstorm for a marketing plan, is that what we're really doing is we're curating ourselves on the page. We're only presenting our Instagram self. And that's really unhealthy. That's what we call authenticity, positivity bias, this bias to only show the world, both on the page and in our lives, the parts of ourselves that we're most proud of, the shiny parts. We really want to write and lead an authentic life. What that means is getting away from the concept of a true or a real self and more toward the concept of a whole self, really looking at all of the parts of the self, the shadow self, and integrating it all and saying, yes, I'm okay with all of it.
All of ourselves. Talk to us more about writing about all of ourselves. What does that mean exactly?
What that means is being willing to allow the pen to move freely, entering a subconscious state, getting that conscious thinking brain a bit offline. Of course, it'll always be there to some regard, but really allowing the pen to lead the way. So I might give my students in a workshop or in a retreat a prompt from poetry or from a photograph or from a song lyric, whatever it may be, any access point. And that's really the starting point. And then from there, we allow the pen to do the work. What that means is no crossouts, no revisions, no worrying about anything you ever learned from any high school or college or grad school teacher, simply forward motion. And in fact, if you were in front of me, Susan, I would flick the back of your pen if I saw it stop moving. So what we're doing is we're staying in this place of allowing the subconscious to bring forth our past, not to stay mired in the past, but to process those experiences. And once we've done that, we can bring them into the present and make decisions moving forward. So often when we do this type of writing, and it is a timed exercise, about 7 minutes, because staying in the subconscious more than that is really tough. But when we do that writing and we read the writing back to ourselves, so often we say, I don't remember writing that. I didn't know I felt that way. I didn't know I still carry that experience with me. So it's really a process of discovery of the whole self.
It's so funny that you say that, because when I look back on some of the books that I've written over the years, I read it, I was like, I have zero recollection of writing that. And then I say, this is quite good. But I don't remember even writing one part of that.
Yes, that's fantastic. And you were in that flow that happens when we get out of that conscious, critical mind.
Yeah, and that's so easy to get into. I mean, I know for myself, I'm speaking for me because I judge what I write, I criticize what I write. And in fact, I'm my worst enemy when it comes to that. So being able to just, as you say, just write garbage, write junk. You had another phrase. What was it? The vomit draft? Was that, did I get that right?
Yes, absolutely. The vomit draft is your first draft of any piece of writing, and it's just for you. And it's often quite cathartic. It might be a piece that involves a lot of tears along the way. It's really for you to figure out what these seedlings of ideas are that want to come forth. And so in that vomit draft, you do want to keep the pen moving as fast as you can, forward motion, no editing, on to the next idea. There is always time to shape later, but there's never another opportunity to capture those first thoughts. And first thoughts carry tremendous energy.
You've mentioned a couple of times the pen. Now, the difference between writing by hand and then typing on our computers. Help me with that. Does that make a difference? And if so, how and why?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that. So, of course, if anyone ever needs to write by a computer, that is totally fine. And you should do that if that is a requirement for you. But if possible, I encourage everyone to pick up a pen. And there's a lot of really terrific research on the kinesthetic connection between the head and the heart and the pen. And when you have that immediacy between what is pouring out of you, literally out of your hand through the ink and onto the page, there is a grounding and a centering and a sense of turning inward that is much harder to achieve in my experience and my experience with the thousands of students and adults I've taught than when technology and a white screen and a clickety clack of a keyboard is inserting itself.
Mm. And I've felt that having done both, but you're right. I think I can get a lot deeper if I'm handwriting something versus typing it on the computer. So, talk about the authentic voice process as being therapeutic, because I find that when I've done it, it's been extraordinarily therapeutic. Is that something that everybody feels?
Yes. In fact, I'd love to say that I'm not a therapist, but this writing sure can be therapeutic. What I find is that people come to me often feeling stuck, feeling as though they're somehow not enough, not good enough, or they're living a life on train tracks laid by others. And through the process of writing the worst junk in the world, they can take a look and say, this is what I'm carrying. This is what I'm believing. This is what I've internalized, and make some decisions about whether that still serves them, or make clearer, more creative decisions moving forward about what they want their professional or their personal life or both to look like. So it's really a cathartic, therapeutic process. And often people will say to me, what if I'm afraid of what I'll see on the page? And I always tell people that we only write what it is we're ready to see. So people can let go of that worry.
Yes, I know that, I know we've all had things happen within family, with friends. I had a particularly tough situation with a family member. I found that writing about it and then looking at this person who initially I thought was this terrible person, I was like, well, what lessons can I learn from her that will help me potentially in the future? And that was incredibly therapeutic. I was like, oh, yes, coming from a different mindset, even though there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of frustration, a lot of sadness. But then what were the lessons that I could learn from this?
Absolutely. People say that they often feel fearless after doing this type of stream of conscious or subconscious writing, free, brave, clear. And we can take those prompts and we can, of course, write about our past, but we can always also write about our present feelings. Or in your case, Susan, we can write about the future, right? How we want the relationship to be, or what is a lesson I can learn and apply to the future.
We started off that you have 5 steps to the authentic voice. And I know that that's something that's near and dear to your whole process. Let's dig into that. Obviously, we're limited in terms of our timing. So give us a taster of what the 5 steps are of the authentic voice.
Absolutely. I'll give you an overview of the 5 steps, and then you can let me know if you'd love more on any of them. The first is to set yourself up with intention. The next is to still your mind. From there, we go into writing what needs to be written, writing the worst junk in all the world. The fourth step is to mine the gems or highlight the heightened feelings. And then the fifth step is to begin again from a gem from the fourth step.
So I love that. The mining the gems just like pops out at me, because I often refer to so many different people who I interview that they share incredible gems, which you're one of them. Talk to us about mining those gems. What does that mean, in terms of our writing?
Absolutely. So earlier I said that first thoughts or first ideas carry tremendous energy. And so when you are rereading the piece that you wrote in that third step, and that's that timed 7 or 8 minute step, you will find moments of heightened extra energy on the page. You don't need to know what those moments reveal or why you're sensing some extra energy there. You simply take a highlighter and you allow your highlighter to mark them. They might be a couple of words or a phrase or perhaps a full sentence, generally not more than a full sentence. And every piece of writing will have gems. It's sometimes hard for people new to the process to find them themselves. So I encourage you to share your writing with someone you trust, and they can help you mine those gems. You will have a feeling that there's more there, and you'll have maybe 7 or 8 gems in a 7 minute piece of writing. They are always there. What you want to do is don't judge them as either good or bad. You simply take one of them, any one of them will work because they all come from you. copy it exactly as written at the top of a new page, quote it so you remember that your prompt has now derived from your own words, and begin again from that gem. You might begin with those words and then just write, I don't know, or maybe this or maybe that. And suddenly you're off and running. Suddenly you're dropping in. And in that fifth step of beginning again, you're going deeper. And that's really where the magic happens.
Yeah, I love that. And what that reminded me of was literally, I have an exercise that if I sit down and write, but I don't know what I want to write about, I just write that on the page. I just don't know what to write about. However, if I did know, what would it be? And,
Yes.
I might repeat that until something stares me in the face. Maybe it's a bird on the bird feeder outside. And I was like, let me write about that. And I start writing about the bird, which then will take me on a journey to something else, and a reminder of something else. So, yes. And you just never know when
I love
it's going to, they're kind of come up, these gems.
Right. I just love that. And one of my favorite exercises is to list it out, I call it. So writing lists as fast as I can. Who doesn't love a good list, right? And so one of my favorite lists is things I will never write about. And of course, the irony is inherent in that I am writing about them. I will never write about such and such. And then off I go and I'm writing about it. And boy, are there some gems there.
Just even thinking about writing junk, I mean, is like, okay, well, what is junk?
Yes. I think that is going to be worked into the title of the book I'm trying to write about the authentic voice process, write the worst junk in all the world. And my students used to dive bomb into the classroom and say, are we doing that thing today, Ms. Dohr, where we write garbage? Can we do that again today? They just loved it. And the reason I left education and started Authentic Voice a year and a half ago is because these tools are just so powerful. Of course, the hardest thing about them is remembering to use them. But if you're willing to pick up that pen, I just knew I had to bring these tools to adults.
Well, I think they're so valuable. For instance, everyone you meet says, oh, I've got a book in me. I want to write a book. I've always thought about writing a book, but I'm not a writer. Therefore, this dream, this thought can't come to fruition.
Right. And we know that that's the worst junk in all the world, right? You're a writer if you write. And as I said, we haven't all studied sculpture or ballet or drumming, but we've all utilized words before. And so if we can get out of our own way and write the worst junk in all the world, you will be amazed at the insights you have. And we're at a place where the world really needs your story. Both our internal landscapes and our external landscapes in the world are quite challenging. And so I really want to encourage your listeners to get out of their own way and just write junk. If I could just get everyone in the world to pick up a pen and write junk, gosh, would we be in a better place?
Just that phrase, I'm writing it down because it was like, yes, get out of your own way. I mean, yes, I'm talking to myself. I know many times that stop myself doing stuff. Whereas if I just done it, I think the more you think about it, then you start getting in your own way. But, that good old Nike expression, just do it, is literally just do it. As you say,
Right.
Get it down.
And isn't it ironic, Susan, that I called you about a week ago and you said, well, how can I help you, Jennifer? And I said, I think I just need you to repeat to me what it is I already know. And you laughed, because even people who do consider themselves writers get stuck and need a coach and need encouragement because it does feel vulnerable, and everyone is telling us to just be real and just be true and be yourself. And I find that to be pretty awful advice, to be honest, because we don't have a true or a real self, but we do have a whole self. And that's really what we want to access. And then from there, we're limitless.
Something that you mentioned when you and I were having our little pre-recording chat, and that was the imposter syndrome, which comes up over and over again. And I'm speaking for myself, and I know so many of, celebrities and just famous people, I mean, say the same thing. But how do you handle that with your students?
I think the irony here is that, of course, if you don't have imposter syndrome, that's problematic in the sense that you have imposter syndrome because you care so deeply, right? You so want to make sure that you have the lived experience to share your knowledge and wisdom with the world. You so care that others don't find you, shooting from the hip and ill prepared or whatnot. And so I think the first thing that I tell myself is whenever I feel nervous or scared, or who am I to write this book, or who am I to hold these retreats or teach, I ask myself, well, who am I not to? And by withholding my life experience, who am I serving? And can I see that as perhaps narcissistic, to withhold information from the world? So I try to turn imposter syndrome on its head. And I say, look, it's a good thing. If I were truly an imposter, I wouldn't have imposter syndrome. I would just be too full of myself to consider that concept. So it comes from a place of caring deeply. It comes from a place of wanting to serve the world really well.
It's such a nice way of looking at it. One of the things that I share with authors who are sort of teetering and they're almost finished, but somehow they just can't get to the finish line. And I've said, don't be so selfish. You're holding this information back from the world. This is great information. Let's share it.
Yes. And I think that's such a better word than narcissistic, right? It's selfish to withhold your gifts. And look, we've only got one shot at this. This is not a dress rehearsal from another time around. So I understand it is scary to put yourself out there. And we are concerned about, what someone might say and what someone might think of us. But I try to say to myself, well, perhaps that person then is really hurting, and isn't what I have to share more important and worthy than worrying about someone disliking me?
Yeah. So criticizing, even when somebody writes to me and says, oh, you had a spelling error or a grammatical error. And I was like, thank you, because I don't see those myself. I love it when people share and help me improve, because sometimes I think we've all done it. We've hit the send button and then you're like, OMG, what? Well, you just
Right.
don't see it until somebody points it out.
Right. And look, it's just feedback. You get to decide what you want to do with it, or feed forward, as I like to call it. So it's all helpful information.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, are we going to get it right the first time? No. And we're not expected to. I mean, Hemingway didn't sit down and just write the masterpiece. I mean, or any of the other famous authors out there. There are multiple drafts. And I'm sure at some point when they say the end, it's like, is it really the end? Or if I was to read this all over again, would I rewrite it?
I'm sure the number of novelists who refuse to open their work because of every comma they would like to change, and we hear these stories of authors becoming depressed after their work comes out because they realize they can't tinker with it anymore. And now it's sort of set in stone. So I think what's most important to remember is that we'll never get to any of those places unless we write garbage on the page to begin. I did want to share, Susan, that's why in my work, I never mix a discussion of craft with the process that I teach, because craft is going to clamp you down. I have so many people coming to me saying, I've taken so many writing workshops and writing academies, and I'm no closer to my manuscript than I was before. And I'll always ask, was there a discussion of craft? And they say, yes, of course. How do you attend a writing workshop without talking about craft? And I say, that's what happened. You shut down in that moment. And invariably, that's what happened. So of course, there's a time and a place for craft, and yet it's not at the beginning.
Yes, I think there's a whole extra discussion all about that. This is brilliant. And I know that our listeners are chomping at the bit to know how they can find out more about Jennifer and her wisdom and her workshops. So take it away.
Oh my gosh, thank you. The best way to reach me is through my website, which is www.authenticvoice.now. And you'll see at the bottom of the homepage a place to sign up for my newsletter, where you'll get tips and writing prompts delivered to your inbox about once a month. There's also a contact Jen form there. I'd love to hear from you. If I can support you in any way, I'm there for you. There's a Calendly form to sign up for a complimentary 20 or 30-minute chat with me, although we invariably run over that. And I can talk with you about whether a workshop or a retreat or one-on-one sessions with me might be a good step for you.
Perfect. I love it. You also have an article that you talked about with your core steps, the 5 steps. And we're going to put that in the show notes, correct?
Terrific. Yes, that's a piece I wrote for Maria Shriver's Sunday paper. And they asked me to delineate the 5 steps with straight ahead how-to language and no jargon and super accessible. So I hope you'll take a look at that and you'll be reminded of what I went through quickly today on this podcast.
Yeah, we really went through that quickly. But that's why they come to you and they're going to read this article and find out more of your brilliance. That's wonderful. And Jennifer, you know that we always end off asking our guests for a golden nugget. You've given us lots, and I'm going to ask you for one more.
Gosh, no pressure. I guess I would share that I believe turning inward is the next frontier, maybe the final frontier. I believe it really is the path to feeling less fearful, more brave, more free. And so anyone who tells you that turning inward is some sort of navel gazing or that it's best to turn your focus outward, I want you to dismiss that voice. And I want you to realize that the gifts you have to bring forth will come from turning inward, meeting yourself on the page, and then bringing that self out into the world. So go ahead and turn inward. You will find the most incredible insights there that you never knew you believed or needed. So let that subconscious run. And I promise you, it's transformational.
Oh, I feel it already. I just wanted to sit down and just write. You've inspired me. I was just like, okay, it's time to just write.
Terrific. I love it, Susan. Let it rip.
I will. And thank you again for sharing so much of your great wisdom. Listeners, check Jennifer out. Check out the article and check out maybe her workshops. I think every one of us can benefit from what she has to offer. And listeners, if your book isn't selling the way you wanted or expected to, let's you and I jump on a quick call together to brainstorm ways you can ramp up those sales, because you've invested a whole lot of time, money, and energy, and it's time you got the return you were hoping for. Go to brainstormwithsusan.com to schedule your free call. In the meantime, I hope this powerful interview sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. Until next week, here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.